J'ouvre.
I now call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 38 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 3, 2022. The committee is meeting to study the impact of commercial shipping on shoreline erosion. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application.
Comme témoin aujourd'hui, nous avons à titre personnel M. Roy Grégoire, résident de Saint-Ignace de Loyola. Représenter le Comité pour la protection des berges du Saint-Laurent, nous avons Mme Micheline Lagarde, présidente, et Mme Karine Durocher, coprésidente. Pour l'Alliance des villes des Grands Lacs et du Saint-Laurent, nous avons Mme Maude Allaire, mairesse, ville de Contrecoeur et membre d'Alliance des villes, et M. Philippe Murphy-Rome, directeur des politiques canadiennes. Pour municipalité de Saint-Ignace de Loyola, nous avons M. Jean-Luc Barthes, maire.
Mr. Chair, point of order, sorry.
One simple question. I'm sorry, we do not have the interpretation. Testing? Yes, very good. So I'm so sorry. Let me go back to our witnesses for Saint-Ignace de Loyola, the municipality. We have Mr. Barthes, the mayor for University Laval. We have Patrick Lajeunesse, professor, and Mr. Jean-François Bernier, who's a research assistant. We will now begin with the opening comments to be made by the Comité pour la protection des berges du Saint-Laurent. Over to you. You have 5 minutes. Ms. Lagarde, I believe that you are on mute, madam. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Standing Committee. My name is Micheline Lagarde. I'm the chair of the Comité pour la protection des berges du Saint-Laurent, a St. Lawrence River Shoreline Protection Committee. My vice chair, Ms. Karine Durocher, is here with us. We are volunteers. We have come to testify to the catastrophe we witness on a daily basis. Commercial shipping is omnipresent in the municipalities of Varennes, Verchères, and Contrecoeur. Every year, over 2,000 ships navigate this river corridor over nearly 25 kilometers at some 600 meters or less from its shorelines. Shoreline erosion has been eating away at our land for some time, more so since the construction of a navigation channel with the ensuing dredging, ongoing, year-round navigation and wave action. This is underscored in many studies, references to which can be found in the brief we have submitted for your consideration. The government did once grasp the need to protect shorelines with built protective structures, but in 1997, focused as it was on balancing the budget, it put an end to existing assistance, leaving resourceless citizens to face erosion that has only worsened since then. Dangerous conditions are at issue. Cantilevered walls, collapsing structures, land being eaten away, ever more abrupt shoreline slopes, deterioration that is ongoing at an ever more rapid pace. I am reporting on our experience, that which we see with our own eyes. On islands in our area, for example, we see far more severe erosion on the sides exposed to commercial shipping. We recognize that commercial shipping is an economic lever of great importance. There's a will to support this sector of the economy and ensure it remains competitive on an international scale. Yet, while it gets richer, with profits in the billions, citizens are left to absorb its economic and ecological effects. I'm referring to life savings, to psychological and financial stress that affects the health of citizens who face very real danger. The government has a responsibility to protect citizens. It must find a way to release a portion of the profits earned to protect the banks of the river. It is inconceivable that citizens be left to ensure the sustainability of the St. Lawrence River and Seaway shorelines without the full support of their governments. Shipping must go green as soon as possible. We appreciate that voluntary speed reduction has been put in place. However, this does not prevent wave action. Waves continue relentlessly to destroy the shoreline. The government has a responsibility for both transport, yes, and its impacts. It must address both. If shipping is a definite cause of erosion at a time when water is becoming more and more a crucial issue and the climate is heating, it's urgent. We must take action. By taking care of the banks of the river, we also protect the river. If the government finds this too complex to do, has no money or programming capacity, how do you expect citizens to succeed where the government remains inactive and does not take responsibility? Shorelines are not a quilt to be patched up bit by bit with piecemeal solutions. They form a whole. The rivers are jewel, and the shorelines, the jewel case. They must be cared for. The denaturalization of shorelines is a challenge for the ecology of the area. The shorelines lose their ability to act as biological corridors between land and water and become inhospitable to all. We ask the committee to immediately recommend that the federal government set up a program to protect the shorelines affected by maritime shipping in the St. Lawrence Seaway. This is essential for wildlife habitat and riverside communities, for Varennes, Verchères, and Contrecoeur, which are much affected by the erosion of their shorelines due to the narrow river corridor at this section of the seaway. Innovative and sustainable solutions are not within the reach of individual citizens. They must be entrusted to experts. Our committee feels that an intergovernmental, interdepartmental solution should be found at this time. It is urgent to take action, given the effects of navigation and its impact on the environment, shorelines, the river, and biodiversity. In conclusion, we thank the members of the committee for this opportunity to be heard and hope solutions to protect the shorelines will soon be put in place. Given that erosion is accelerating at an alarming rate, we would like to participate in the choice of solutions. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Madame Lagarde. And now we will hear from the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. To you, you have 5 minutes for your opening comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'd first like to thank the members of the Standing Committee for receiving us today on this important study. For our opening statement, I will be sharing my time with the Mayor of Contrecoeur, Ms. Madallaire. To begin, for those of you who are not familiar with the Cities Initiative, we are a binational coalition of more than 170 mayors across Ontario, Quebec, and the 8 Great Lakes states. We work to advance the socioeconomic and environmental health of cities across the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River Basin. And if there's one issue that unites our members, from Leamington to Quebec City, it's the concern around shoreline resilience, particularly when it comes to erosion. We hope that commitments by the federal government, like a strengthened $1 billion freshwater action plan and a well-funded national adaptation strategy, will lead to decisive action to counter shoreline erosion across the Canadian Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River Basin. And we're pleased to work with members like the City of Contrecoeur to raise the profile of this issue and advocate for federal action. I'll now pass it on to my colleague to complete our opening statement, Mayor Madallaire. La parole est à vous, Madame la Mairesse.
The floor is yours, Madam Mayor. Unfortunately, Ms. Allaire, you are on mute. Very well. So first of all, like my colleague, I would like to thank the members of the Standing Committee for inviting me to come and testify. I would also like to greet the Vice Chair, who is the MP of the riding in which the town of Contrecoeur is located and of which I'm the mayor. Erosion has several consequences for municipalities, including degrading environments for our citizens. Our public infrastructure is affected, and we are losing our natural ecosystems required to ensure that our communities can face climate change. Given these issues, municipalities have a responsibility to mobilize in the interest of their citizens. It's a matter of public safety, of protecting the environment, and of ensuring that our citizens have a quality of life. Despite limited resources to fight erosion, it's clear that municipalities have inherited the burden of dealing with this problem. As for Contrecoeur, Varennes, and Verchères, this represents an investment of at least $35 million merely to stabilize the current state of our shorelines. And this is the case for all shorelines of the St. Lawrence Seaway. I'm thinking of Varennes losing 1 meter of land every year in the Parc de la Commune and has had to carry out emergency work just a few weeks ago to avoid losing a bicycle path. Erosion is above all a natural phenomena that now is largely amplified by climate change and the numerous extreme weather events which are taking place, putting significant pressure on our shorelines. We, for example, freeze, thaw cycles, storms, and heavy rainfall. At the same time, the erosion protection infrastructure built by the federal government in the 1950s and 70s is deteriorating at an alarming rate. At this point, these infrastructures no longer protect the banks, which makes communities even more vulnerable along the shorelines. As far as the wake of commercial ships and their impact on erosion, we'd like to remind you that we are not against commercial traffic, maritime traffic. On the contrary, our relations with this sector are very good. The problem has been recognized on their side, explaining why the community has already mobilized to protect the speed of freighters along the seaway, to limit the speed, rather. We're happy to collaborate with partners doing their part for this. But I think the government should study the regulation of pleasure craft speeds on the river. The problem is, of course, mostly one of mitigation, adaptation to ensure the resilience of our shores facing climate change. We must invest in solutions which will allow us to reduce erosion and the impact of erosion on communities rather than simply attacking a specific sector. It's difficult to understand why the federal government abolished its shoreline protection program in 1997. Since then, the situation has continued to deteriorate. The municipalities are paying the price. As agreed in a resolution of the City of Contrecoeur, unanimously carried by the members of the Cities Alliance, increased federal support for initiatives to increase shoreline resiliency in the Great Lakes Lawrence River Basin must be a priority. Every dollar invested will reduce emergency spending in the event of a future disaster. Finally, the federal government is being asked to collaborate with provincial governments, communities, and stakeholders to study the phenomena of shoreline erosion along the entire St. Lawrence Seaway. In conclusion, I would like to say again that cities are directly affected by climate change. As a local government, we are an important player able to support adaptation and resilience in our community. To do so, though, we need the support of all other levels of government. Thank you for your support.
Prochainement, nous avons la municipalité de Saint-Agathe.
We now have the municipalité de Saint-Angas-de-Léola. The floor is yours. Mr. Bart, I was just notified that this witness is not logged in, so we'll move on to Laval University. The floor is yours. 5 minutes, please, gentlemen. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. We were called before you as an objective third party to present our research work, and we are a team with a background as geomorphologists. We work on the St. Lawrence with the Ministry of the Environment since 2007, and we've developed research projects in conjunction with the ministry. Our studies have a teledetection, remote detection LIDAR approach, and we also use geographical information systems, GIS. We also conduct field observations. Patrick Lejeunesse will be presenting some of the projects that we have undertaken in conjunction with the Environment Ministry. Thank you very much, Jean-François, Mr. Chairperson. So that's correct. We've started to work on the St. Lawrence shoreline erosion in 2007, and as part of a research project with the Environment Ministry to combat climate change. As Jean-François alluded to, we focused on aerial images, remote detection and geographical information systems to see how the shorelines have reacted to erosion over time. We have two projects, the first of which characterises the shorelines over 3,000 kilometres between Cornwall and the city of Quebec. And all of that information is now publicly available, and everyone is aware of the shoreline erosion along the St. Lawrence. This project finished in 2020, and since then we've turned our attention to another project. We are monitoring the erosion of the shorelines in the short, mid and long term, how shorelines have evolved over time in response to climatic factors, natural factors and human-based factors. We're still getting a handle on this. We don't understand everything, but our goal is to enhance our understanding of shoreline erosion along the St. Lawrence. And we have borne witness to this, and we're delighted to respond to the questions posed by members of the committee to the best of our ability and our knowledge. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you very much.
In our first panel and round of questioning with Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony this afternoon. It's certainly an important conversation. I suppose it depends on where you live in the country if it's really affects your ridings or not. But I will tell you, Mr. Chair, it certainly affects my riding. So I live in Essex. I represent Essex right next to Windsor. So we've got the St. Clair, Lake St. Clair at the top. Then we've got Lake Erie. And then we've got the Detroit River. And so I've had the opportunity, Mr. Chair, to visit the likes of ADM, which carry our grain, the grain that is produced primarily in southwestern Ontario, and shipped over to the United States. And then we have all the aggregate, so the aggregate that comes from Manitoulin Island as an example, the steel that's carried to produce our vehicles, that same steel that's produced in Sault Ste. Marie. So this is a very important conversation. So I'm honored to be here on this. I would also just suggest very quickly, Mr. Chair, the Detroit River runs at about 11 kilometers per hour is the current. And it has for as long as the research that I've done, and it has in the history of what I know, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So I thought it was a pretty good testimony from Madame Lagarde, and she had mentioned about shipping must go green. And ironically, when I was in Taiwan, I began to see what real green shipping looks like. And so, you know, through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Lagarde, you also spoke about protecting the shorelines, and let me just preface this by saying there is no question that with the very, very high levels of water in the Great Lakes that are certainly receding, have receded about 3 feet over the last year. I'm not sure what that means to Lake St. Clair, or sorry, to the St. Lawrence Seaway. What specifically, Madame Lagarde, what specifically are your solutions? Because you had mentioned about solutions, and I'm curious as to what your solutions would be.
Vous êtes en...
You're on mute, Ms. Lagarde. Ms. Lagarde. So, quite clearly, there is a degradation of the shoreline, and the piecemeal approach left up to residents, well, in fact, we need experts. The interpreter will suspend service until the sound issue is addressed. The witness needs to adjust her microphone.
Excuse-moi, Madame Lagarde, faut qu'on arrête ça là juste pour 1 minute parce que ça a l'air qu'on n'a pas de traduction. Donc, on va juste vérifier.
D'accord.
OK, est-ce que vous pouvez...
Could you please just raise your mic just a tad, please, Ms. Lagarde? Is that better? The interpreter believes that the headset is not being recognized.
Est-ce que vous pouvez garder si vous...
Could you please check to see if your headset is properly connected? Perhaps unplug and plug back in your headset?
Et voilà. Est-ce que c'est mieux?
It is not better.
OK. Il faut que vous vérifiez que vous avez...
Please check your settings to make sure that your headset is properly selected in your computer settings. The interpreter can hear the witness, but once the interpreter starts interpreting, his voice drowns out the witness's voice, and it also becomes particularly dangerous with the discrepancy between the volume of other participants and the witnesses.
à gauche.
Your microphone isn't properly selected, Ms. Lagarde. Bottom left-hand corner of your screen, if you would, please. Can you hear me? Apparently not. You haven't selected the right headset in your computer settings. I've selected the loud speaker, apparently. Can you hear me a little bit better? Is that better? Can you hear me better now? Yes. Yes, it seems to be working better. Thank you. So we'll give you an opportunity to respond to that question. Please proceed.
Time, Mr. Lewis, as well, so that won't come off yours. Donc, vous pouvez aller...
Please proceed, Ms. Lagarde. Thank you very much. So basically, what I want to tell you is this. Protecting the shoreline is crucial. They're in an appalling state currently, and we can't leave things up to local residents because quite clearly it costs a fortune, and we need engineering coastal experts to come up with innovative and sustainable solutions. We need the vegetation to regenerated. There needs to be an exchange, if you will, between the land and the waters. We need to maintain proper biodiversity. One can't simply offload a bunch of rocks and that would not be a viable solution as a kind of a dam. It just won't work. So,
very much. Thank you very much to the witness. Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry to cut you off. I just have a couple more questions here. Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Ram. Thank you, sir, for speaking about or mentioning Leamington. And ironically, I live in Kingsville, which is right next door. And then we could talk about Essex, and we could talk about LaSalle and Amherstburg and all the way up there. And I have visited many of these homes right on the river. And I understand about putting in all these break walls, and it's something that is probably tougher for them to do through all the red tape. However, my question, Mr. Ram, through you, Mr. Chair, has the IJC been consulted on the St. Lawrence River and or on the Detroit River on this conversation? So the International Joint Commission. And if so, what is their stand? What's their response? Do we have a willing partner with the United States to this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member for Essex for that question. I'm pleased to say that with the city's initiative last year, we put together a Mayor's Advisory Commission on coastal resilience, and we have the pleasure of having a member from Essex to bring a local perspective on the case of erosion and flooding in the region. That commission has been put in place by bringing together mayors and experts, external experts, to provide recommendations and different perspectives on this issue of coastal resilience, whether that's erosion or flooding. With respect to the IJC, or the International Joint Commission, we do have a good relationship with the organization. We haven't consulted them directly, to my knowledge, on this coastal resilience piece, but I do know that they're quite active with respect to those questions, but I wouldn't want to speak to them or their perspective with respect to coastal resilience and what they're supporting.
Thank you, sir. And so, through you, Mr. Chair, right back to the witness, please. So, is Mayor Dilkins, is he one of the 150 some mayors that are on that board that you spoke of?
That's correct. Yes, the Mayor of Windsor is one of our members.
Okay, fantastic. And so, who do we need to speak to then with the IJC? Because I think this is a much larger conversation than just the Detroit River, the St. Clair River, and the St. Lawrence Seaway. This is a much larger conversation because we need to get everybody at the table for this study. I would be blown away if the IJC wasn't at least invited to be witnesses here today. I think they're the major players, and they need to be around the table. Do you agree with me on that, sir?
Well, certainly the IJC has a part to play in terms of a conversation around Great Lakes water levels and St. Lawrence levels, given their responsibility for managing those water levels. Again, I don't want to speak for the IJC or whether they should or should not be invited, but they're certainly a very important stakeholder with respect to Great Lakes management on both sides of the border, and are an important partner that has a role to play along with both federal governments in terms of managing.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Next, we have Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just going to take off from where Mr. Lewis left off, because I think he's in the right state of mind in terms of his questioning. So, Mr. Lewis, thank you for that. And Mr. Barcelou-Duval, thank you for bringing the study forward because it is relevant. This, Mr. Chairman, is quite frankly something that we've been working on for quite some time through the formation of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Task Force, a group, I might add, that many of you that have interest in Great Lakes and St. Lawrence may want to be a part of moving on well into the future, because these are the very issues that we're dealing with. This group is a bipartisan, bicameral, and binational group, and to Mr. Lewis's comments, does include partners such as some of the folks that we see on the screen here today, as well as that of the International Joint Commission, the IJC, to deal with these very issues. Mr. Chair, I have put forward a report with the recommendations to the group, this group that I'm speaking about, and to the government that establishes a Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, an initiative that is comparable to what the U.S. has moved forward with in the last few years. Those recommendations within the report are aligned with the action plan to protect the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence 2020-2030, implementing innovations in science and in governance, which I might add most of the members on this call, including the Great Lakes Mayor's Initiative or Cities Initiative, have been a part of authoring and populating that report. With that, and if I can, I'll get a bit more granular. Page 10, 2.1, Building Climate Change Resiliency in Shoreline Communities, identifies a lot of the recommendations and or the next steps that can be taken with all the partners to actually deal with this issue. And once again, Mr. Chairman, that's exactly what this task force is doing. So once again, I will encourage a lot of the members that are here and are interested in this topic to become part of that task force, because again, we're moving forward and bringing the ball down the field to ensure some of these recommendations are moved forward with. The government has, in fact, responded of late by putting in place a Canada Water Agency, which will establish a freshwater strategy and a blue economy strategy, taking into consideration some of these challenges that we're speaking about. This will be, members of the committee, a whole-of-government approach to satisfy a Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So with that, I'm going to get into my questioning, primarily to the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. The first question is, what kind of work has the Cities Initiative done to study the impacts of erosion on its members?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the member from Niagara Centre for the question and for his leadership around Great Lakes issues. He's probably, as most people at the table would recognize, one of our Great Lakes champions, and want to thank him for his work. As the member alluded, the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative contributed to the development of the Action Plan 2020-2030, along with the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, Stratégie Saint-Laurent in Quebec, the Council of the Great Lakes Region, and Freshwater Futures. The action plan identified a series of recommendations around erosion, including the need to study this issue in a concerted and coordinated manner among the different levels of government, different stakeholders, Indigenous communities and partners, as well as focusing on 5 shoreline priority zones, including Central West Lake Erie, Central Lake Huron, Central Lake Ontario, North Central Lake Superior, and the southeastern Georgian Bay. It also identified priority zones in Quebec, including Montreal, Quebec, and the corridor that we're talking about today, or a lot of our interveners talked about today. And so we continue to advocate around those recommendations in the action plan in order to hopefully see it funded, especially as the Canada Water Agency comes into in line. And as we hopefully see the funding commitment of $1 billion in that freshwater action plan enacted, as well as further details around the national adaptation strategy. I also just want to mention really quickly the Mayor's Commission on Coastal Resilience recommendations, which touch largely again on the need for greater federal leadership and collaboration with the provinces around this issue, to work in tandem with local communities that are impacted by this issue, in order to identify the different impacts and causes of this, as well as identifying different solutions that could be enacted. We also have a bias at the organization for nature-based and hybrid solutions, but we also recognize that at the local level, and as well as with private landowners, that we need to increase our knowledge and awareness around these solutions. We can't always have recourse to traditional hardened gray infrastructure solutions, but we need, again, a center of excellence or a series of technical guidance that municipalities can rely on in order to understand what best solutions with respect to whether natural infrastructure, traditional infrastructure, or a hybrid solution could be implemented in their given circumstances. We also need to work together to identify and remedy local information and data gaps that exist. A lot of what we were hearing is the fact that there's a lot of information out there, but it's not being coordinated in a centralized manner. And that's something that we certainly see a role, for example, with the Canada Water Agency that it could play. And then finally, working with municipalities to identify the knowledge gaps as we sort of broaden this conversation around coastal resilience to include green infrastructure. That takes socioeconomic and equity considerations into mind. And then finally, I also want to highlight the fact that we issued a survey last year where we identified out of the 45 Ontario communities that responded to the survey that they'll be investing at least $275 million over the next 5 years to address coastal damage to the region. And that's on top of $82 million that had been spent by those 45 communities in the 2 previous years. And even though we didn't get as much response on the Quebec side, unfortunately, we still identified $56 million that those local communities in Quebec are planning to invest over the next 5 years. So I'll stop there so I don't take all your time.
Well done. He actually answered all the questions that I was going to ask. So perfect. Good job.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy-Réaume. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Bars.
Thank you. Now we will go on to Mr. Barsalou-Duval. The floor is yours, sir. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to all the witnesses with us today for having accepted to testify before us. I would like to take advantage of this moment to thank. We've just seen, I'm so sorry, that 2 witnesses have just joined us. We will give you a chance to put questions to them, but before that, we do need to test their sound.
To allow for that sound test to take place, and we will resume in 1 minute. Donc, Monsieur Barcelou-Duval, la parole.
So, Mr. Barcelou-Duval, once again, you have the floor, and we'll start your 6 minutes anew. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I can introduce myself, and then, Mr. Chair, I would just like us to share the time. I think our witness has just joined us and hasn't quite understood how we are proceeding, given that it's at the beginning of the committee that was explained to them, unless you'd like to give them time right now. As you wish. As I am open to the committee's suggestions, would we like to allot 5 minutes for the opening statements of the witnesses who have just joined us? Very good. All right, then. Opening remarks, please. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Grégoire. Thank you so much. You know, in the 90s, the federal government came here and worked on the shorelines to protect us on the island from the boats and so forth. But the problem since then is that 97, when they stopped that, there was still about 1 kilometer to the west of the island and about 2 kilometers to the east of it where that work was not finished. The citizens there didn't have the means to finish the work that had been undertaken by the federal government at the outset. They did what they could, of course, to protect the shoreline, but here's what happened. Right now, today, if you compare their lands to the 80s, some have lost about 25 feet, 30 feet of land of their shoreline that's really been eaten away, that is receded, and now the recession of the shorelines is such that, you know, soon it will be the houses. The part that the federal government did finish with in the western section, well, even there, when the ices move in on the structure that they created, well, the ice moves in on the land as well, the citizens' lands. So that, too, is eating away at the shorelines. So that's what I want to tell you. We're also asking that the federal government bring back that shoreline protection program because, you know, in Saint Ignace, the shorelines are receding and, you know, it's very clear to us and there are reasons for it. And I know that even parts of Montreal, Varennes, Contrecoeur, Sainte-Anne-de-Sorel, and all the way up to Lac Saint-Pierre are experiencing the same erosion, a lot of erosion. You know, right now, the boats, when they come through, about 4,500 of them every year on the St. Lawrence Seaway. And I don't think that they always respect the speed limits, the navigational speeds limit, especially at night, because probably at night no one is watching them. So they may accelerate just a bit, you know. So that's all I have to say. But thank you so much for hearing us. And I will turn the floor over to Mr. Grégoire. Yes, hello. I am Mr. Grégoire. I'm a resident of Saint-Ignace-de-Loyola in the lower St. Lawrence area. And, you know, when the ice comes down in the spring, the part where works were put up by the federal government, well, that does hold back the ice. It's kind of like a special dam against the ice. So the ice coming down is stopped there. But, you know, it builds up 20 feet high. I'm about 20 feet above the water level, and I know how high the ice comes. We know that there are many factors contributing to erosion, but as far as I can see, the main cause of the erosion we're seeing now is the unfinished federal government protection works. As my friend has said, there are about 4,500 shipping vehicles coming through every year, and climate change as well is having its effects, as we all know. Studies have shown that the wake of the vessels is more destructive than wave action and accounts for about 70% of the erosion on the St. Lawrence Seaway shorelines, especially around the canal area. And there it really does cause 70% of the erosion of the shoreline. So that's pretty much the data. It's becoming very worrisome. I, too, have got erosion on my lands. It's really pretty considerable. I've got an engineer who came by just recently, and I'm waiting for his report. on the situation. That's pretty much what I have to say. And if you've got any questions, I'll try to answer them. Thank you very much, Mr. Grégoire.
Mr. Barcelot-Duval, finally, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir. Well, as I was saying earlier, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today, as well as members of the committee for agreeing to conduct a study on this issue, which is very important to my riding, but also to other ridings, I'm sure. And I can see that folks from the other side of the river are being affected by this situation, and elsewhere along the St. Lawrence and the Great Lakes, people are coming to grips with erosion issues. Now, I don't have much time, so I'll move on to questions. Ms. Lagarde, I'll start with you. Here's what I'd like to know. Many witnesses have alluded to the fact that the protective works were built after the St. Lawrence Seaway was put in place, and it was dug out to allow for bigger ships in the 50s to navigate that channel. There were breakwalls that were put in place and compensation of residents who were affected. In what state are these protective shoreline works currently, please? Response. You're on mute, I'm afraid. Well, I own land which has no protection, and the waves are eroding my land. There is a woman in my neighbourhood who's 100 years old and who has a very large lot, and these walls are defective and are even collapsing. What everyone's calling for is concrete action in short order, because this is a serious issue. Ms. Lagarde, what you're telling me is that these shoreline protection works are in fact collapsing or being degraded across the whole St. Lawrence. Well, there are a lot of lots that have no longer are protected whatsoever. I know that there are other residents that didn't enjoy any shoreline protective works in other areas. I know that Ms. Laroche may be in that situation. What's the situation like in your neck of the woods? The property we have on Sainte-Thérèse Island opposite Varennes has over 2 square metres of erosion on an annual basis. There's no protection of the shorelines. We're close to the Maritimes shoreline, and in years where there are low seas, there's still damage, and when there are high seas, there's even more damage. This is catastrophic, and it's quite... we're disgruntled by the fact that nothing's being done to help us. Ms. Lagarde, Ms. Desrochers, were residents to decide to invest in the restoration of their shorelines in front of their land, what kind of cost ballpark would we be looking at there to protect their land? Response, about $5,000 to $6,000 per square metre. So that means about $200,000 per resident, and those folks just don't have that money. And of course, they're not experts either. You need to be highly specialised to do work that's sustainable and that's innovative and that will enhance biodiversity. And one must also factor in climate change and the quality of water. You can't just build breakwalls that are defective, that aren't good for the flora and fauna and for human beings either in many cases. Well, what you're saying is that these breakwalls or retaining walls from an ecological standpoint aren't optimal, and especially if they're built to scale, because there'd be a loss of biodiversity that would ensue. Now, you alluded to the fact that the federal government erected these breakwalls, but then when they were underfunded, and what does the government say when you call on them to restore these breakwalls? the response that we've got from the government is that there is no program or that the departments pass the buck to each other. And I've written to a lot of departments, Fisheries and Oceans, Transport Canada, both federal and provincial ministries as well. And I think that there needs to be a collaborative approach. Folks need to sit down together and engage, undertake pilot projects, and in short order. And all the stakeholders can contribute to the solution, in my opinion. But it can't be left up to everyday residents who don't have the skills to do this and don't have the financial resources to protect our shorelines. You talked about the natural climate effects on erosion, as other witnesses have, but there's also an impact due to commercial shipping, and that's the focus of our study today. Do you have the financial basis to make such an assertion? Well, I'll allow Ms. Desrochers to respond to that question. You have about 15 seconds left, Ms. Desrochers. There have been a number of studies conducted on the link between erosion and commercial shipping. In the early 2000s, Diane Dauphin conducted studies. And in the wake of those studies, in fact, they demonstrated that there was, in areas where the channels are close to the shoreline, within 600 meters of the seaway, that's where speed reduction measures were put in place. Now, recent studies have demonstrated that despite this reduction in speed, there's still ongoing erosion. Thank you very much, Ms. Durocher. Unfortunately, your time has run out.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses and to my colleague, Mr. Barcelou-Duval, for bringing forward this study. Perhaps I'll start with Madame Lagarde. I was reading in a Canadian Press article about your committee's work, and in the article it mentioned that you had tried to get a meeting with the Minister of Transport and were unsuccessful. This was the former Minister of Transport. I wonder if you've approached the current Minister of Transport and whether you've had any success in gaining an audience with the federal government to discuss your concerns.
No, I didn't. I wasn't successful. Apparently, they'd be glad to meet with me. But, of course, COVID struck, and I approached them again, tried to get a meeting, and still have been unsuccessful to date.
Thank you, Madame Lagarde. My next question, this issue, of course, is a long ways away from the riding I represent in Northwest British Columbia, but it seems like a very important one. And listening to the testimony so far, it seems that there's some very important research being done on a wide range of solutions. And at the same time, there's some infrastructure that's already in place that isn't being maintained. I wonder if your committee, looking at this bigger work, which is much more long-term, and then looking at structures that are rusting and falling apart at your footsteps or at your doorstep, do you feel that the best option is simply to repair and maintain the existing infrastructure?
The existing infrastructure, well, in some cases, like in mine, it's completely inexistent. So, yes, there are some structures that are holding up and that would be worth maintaining. But as soon as there's a breach of water, well, of course, the water freezes and the breakwall collapses completely. So in the areas where there is no infrastructure, well, it might be worthwhile to build a greener, quote-unquote, structure and also maintain those existing structures if there are cost constraints. But right off the bat, there needs to be concrete action taken, and in short order. It's affecting the water, the biodiversity, and it has major ramifications on the human beings who are coming to grips with, who are dealing with very dangerous conditions. There are a number of houses that are at stake as well, as Ms. Desrochers alluded to.
Gard, you indicated previously that you felt like the responsibility for this issue was being passed back and forth between different jurisdictions, different levels of government. And I noted in that Canadian Press article, I noted Transport Canada drawing people's attention to the fact that the province and the municipalities also have a responsibility. Does it feel like there's a lack of leadership in this situation?
Well, there are a lot of organizations, departments, ministries that share a number of responsibilities. Perhaps there's a lot of overlap, but it might behoove one single department to take ownership of the file and to spearhead the initiative. And the buck would stop with that ministry or department, and they would take action, because otherwise there's a lot of passing of the buck. No one's accountable. No one is held to account. There's a lot of research being undertaken, and that's all well and good. But at some point in time, there needs to be an outcome, a positive result. So, yes, I think that one department or ministry should take the reins and take concrete action, whether it be in the area of climate change, transportation. You don't have to work in stovepipes, but in a collegial manner. That's how things should proceed.
Lagarde, I'm going to move on to Mr. Lajeunesse. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Very interesting to hear about your research. And I'm wondering, we heard about various causes of this erosion that's occurring. And I wonder if your research has given any indication of the relative contribution of each of those causes, be they shipping or climate-related factors.
Monsieur le Président, oui.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we are seeing human effects as well as natural effects, but let me focus on a number of sectors from a geographical standpoint. And let me talk about the erosion of shorelines. We're observing more natural erosion than human-made erosion. Now, the interpreter would ask that other microphones be switched off in the room because it's impossible for him to understand and interpret. The witness will have to repeat what he said, I'm afraid.
Pour nous, il y a un effet anthropique assez important qui nous paraît clair dans ce contexte-là. Mais le gros problème qu'on...
Again, there was a microphone on in the room for half of the response, and therefore when the interpreter starts to speak, his voice drowns out the answer.
À comprendre, il y a pas toujours... On sait qu'il y a un impact, oui, il y a de la littérature qui le dit, mais comment ça affecte les berges en rocher, etc.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lajeunesse. Il reste plus de...
There's no remaining time, and there was no interpretation, apparently.
Mr. Backrack.
Just clear this up. It sounds like there was a microphone that was on, and I believe it was mine, but I'm also under the impression that I don't control my microphone. So maybe, should I be pushing the button to turn it off?
Yeah, the audio department will take care of your microphone.
Okay, fabulous.
Yeah. But so there was no translation for the final 20 seconds? The whole thing wasn't translated? The last part. Okay. Monsieur Lajeunesse.
Mr. Lajeunesse, if you could please repeat what you just said, the final 30 seconds of your response, if you would. Oh, yes, Mr. Chairperson. We see that there's an impact on the natural shoreline from shipping. Of course, those exposed to shipping are more heavily eroded. It's difficult to determine what the natural erosion effects are. The scientific studies don't really provide a lot of insight into that. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Prochainement, next we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair, and to all the witnesses for your testimony here. And let me pick up on the questioning from Mr. Bachrach of the representatives from the Université Laval, who are bringing to us a research perspective. And it's important that we have that as a committee to reflect on research as we consider the study, which is I will remind everyone about commercial shipping and its impact on shoreline erosion. And so maybe, I know there was only 20 seconds in the last question. If there's anything further you want to elaborate on about your research or that you didn't have a chance to speak to in your testimony.
Well, one point I would like to address, en fait, je vais parler en français.
Well, I will speak in French. It'll be easier for me. We all know about erosion, and we know about the effects of wakes, but it's difficult to evaluate the relative effect of the shipping and difficult to tell what's affecting the protective infrastructure. For one, they're sort of at the end of their life cycle as it is. They're not in great condition, so they can't really do what they're supposed to do. They've degraded, 50 years old for some of them, so they're certainly not new. Thank you.
Was there any? Did you look at what other jurisdictions are looking into? Was that factored into the design of what you were studying? If I understand, with the Ministry of Environment in Quebec, anything that might provide some insight to this committee of what other jurisdictions are doing?
Oui, Monsieur le Président, je pourrais laisser.
Yes, Chair. I could allow Jean-François Bernier respond to that, perhaps. Allow him to respond. If I understood the question correctly, it's about research on the effects on the current structures or recommendations to put in green structures. Perhaps you could repeat the question. I'm sorry.
Consideration of your research and the design of your research, did you look at what, or are you aware of, from your expertise in this area, of what other jurisdictions are doing to address this particular issue and what that might inform the committee?
En fait, pour ajouter à ça.
All right. To add to what has been said already, I think it was Micheline Karine who addressed this. There's been a mention of studies carried out since the year 2000. Yann Dauphin and others have carried out excellent work on shoreline erosion in the navigation channels. For example, there's been mention of reducing the speed of the vessels since the year 2000, but their work stopped shortly after that, and they never actually tested whether the reduction in speed had an effect on the erosion. So there's been no clear signal, no real trend that was settled on. With the study we're carrying out, the follow-up study, Mr. Lajeunesse mentioned that we have studied Île-Marie, l'Île des Barques as well, and indeed, we see that erosion is ongoing in the St. Lawrence River Seaway area. We're able to tell which sectors are most eroded. Again, it's mostly the natural shorelines that erode fastest, that recede more quickly when exposed to wake. What we're seeing, though, is that these natural shorelines are continuing to erode, 50% less than they were in the past, perhaps. Nevertheless, on some islands, it's, 1 to 2 meters a year being lost, as other members or other witnesses, rather, have mentioned as well.
Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, because there's been discussion of, different levels of government, municipalities, citizens, property owners, all having the IJC all having a stake in this in a collaborative approach. So in an ideal world, who would do what, and what might that look like to bring? What should each level of government be looking at?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Our recommendations, and I'll go back to the Action Plan 2020-30, is for the federal government to take a leadership position on this file, to work with the provinces and other stakeholders like cities, like individual landowners, to come up with regional or local plans to address issues or the phenomena in a localized manner. One thing that we are noticing, and I think everyone at the table would agree, is you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach for the entire Great Lakes and or St. Lawrence, or the entire country for that matter. And so what the action plan identified were priority zones where those investments could take place. Municipalities, as the local governments or the governments that are closest to their citizens, of course, have a role to play, but their resources are quite limited. We are talking about a fiscal framework that doesn't really favor municipalities to take those on as a responsibility, even though they have a growing set of responsibilities, in fact. And something else that we're hearing is that a lot of the programming that's available
Guillaume, we have no time left for that round of questioning. We've actually gone over already. Thank you very much, Mr. Muse. Next, we have Ms. Koutrakis. Ms. Koutrakis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses for being here with us this afternoon. I'm going to begin with a question to the Honourable Mayor Allaire or Mr. Murphy-Réaume. I would like to know what sorts of consultations you've undertaken with your communities or in your communities about the type of regulations that your citizens would like. That's a very good question. I admit that we haven't yet undertaken any consultations with our citizens about regulations that would have an effect on, their ability to ensure that their shoreline survive, shoreline resilience, and so on. But this is a question we're asked more and more these days. The mayor of Varennes and that city had to carry out emergency works, given that the Minister of the Environment at the provincial level had delayed too long, such that it fell to the town, the municipality, to undertake the construction of infrastructure without even having the necessary approvals, which of course put them at risk at several levels. But our consultation will be ongoing. We'd like to better understand how to develop a new regulatory framework that will support municipal intervention, citizen intervention, helping them protect their shorelines. I only have the terminology in English, so we say an impact assessment. And that sort of impact assessment, environmental impact assessment, is what we need. We might see whether there are any ways to improve that sort of analysis and the whole process, really, especially as well for the natural shorelines. Good. My next question for Mr. Murphy-Réaume. I think that before we carry regulatory changes, the federal government must evaluate a number of elements, such as social and environmental advantages and economic benefits as well. Would that seem reasonable to you, that all these factors be taken into account? We are, all said and done, an environmental organization. So that's something we don't want to see ignored. We also work based on fair distribution of water, so the economic factor also counts, you see. What we're experiencing is long wait times for a community that keep us from reaching a solution. When you're losing at least 1 meter a year of your shoreline, that's a serious problem. If you're trying to protect public lands or private lands. And my final question is for any of the witnesses. Whoever wishes to answer, I'll leave it up to you. Do you know whether the federal government has undertaken any programming or provincial governments to protect shorelines from erosion? And if they have you been in touch with Environment Canada to see, whether they have programming like this? Ms. Lagarde, perhaps. Yes, perhaps I could answer, if I may. In Quebec, we do know that in the estuary and the St. Lawrence Gulf, there are shoreline protection programs, initiatives basically to protect these areas that are underway, mostly linked to climate change resilience programming. So have you been in touch with Environment Canada in this regard, or have you only been speaking with the provincial authorities? We have contacted Environment Canada. We have approached Minister Guillemot, whom we have not yet been able to meet on an official basis. The work underway is mostly funded by the provincial government, at least to my knowledge. I'm not aware of any Environment Canada program underway right now. Perhaps someone else around the table does know something about such a program. Thank you, Ms. Koutrakis and Ms. Durocher. Now we will turn to Mr. Barsalou-Duval. You have 2.5 minutes, sir. The floor is yours. Thank you. I will put my questions to Mr. Bernier and Mr. Lajeunesse of l'Université de Laval. All right, so you are our experts at present on the St. Lawrence shoreline recession, the receding shorelines. Given that you have studied this, many citizens have called for a program to precede the shorelands. And we've heard that they were told, look, this is not a Transport Canada problem, for example. It's a climate change issue, and so on and so forth. So I would like to know what your take on this is. Let's look at les Îles de la Madeleine, eastern Quebec, where erosion can also be attributed to the tides, the winds, the melting ice, and, of course, shipping. How can we evaluate the relative weight of each of these factors in order to tell whether commercial shipping is a major factor or not? When it comes, of course, to Varennes, Contrecoeur, your area, the area that some of the witnesses represent, but also for the Montreal area and further up the seaway. What's the science on this? I'll speak first. Comparing all this to les Îles de la Madeleine, of course, there are climate change-related extreme weather events, storms. The St. Lawrence, where we are, the Contrecoeur and that archipelago, is not exposed to that type of storm. So when it comes to climate change, difficult to say how much that's having an effect. The water level of the St. Lawrence Seaway is controlled by a number of dams in the St. Lawrence further up. For the navigation canal per se, storms, wind doesn't necessarily have the same effect. It's not really there. The gigantic 3 meters high waves are not something we see in the navigable seaway. Wake, of course, is a factor. That's why we feel, and some of the data does show, that wake is a major factor. Of course, in the spring, it's worse if you have ice that's floating in the seaway, and then you've got wake that is pushing that ice into the shoreline. That is a major factor. So that's kind of part of the explanation we have of the effects of wakes. Yes, climate change is playing a role, but commercial shipping has sensitized, if I may say, the shorelines. There's the speed issue. It's difficult to predict what difference it will make to reduce speeds. Thank you very much, Mr. Bernier. Mr. Bartholomew-Duval.
The floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Chair. My question for Mr. Lajeunesse or Mr. Bernier relates to the infrastructure that's already in existence along the St. Lawrence. And, I know in other river environments, when you harden part of the bank, it can result in unintended consequences downstream, that it can transfer the energy of the river and cause bigger problems somewhere else. I wonder if your research has shown that that's occurring in this situation with this old infrastructure that was built in the 60s and 70s. Has it had unintended consequences elsewhere along the river corridor?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I could take a stab at that and then my colleague can perhaps chime in. Yes, we have observed that kind of change. Now, Ms. Lagarde referred to the river earlier as a water-land continuum, but there has to be a continuum along the shoreline for the sediments. And sometimes the infrastructure will prevent the transfer of sedimentation along the shoreline and sometimes cause erosion. And that is a well-known, well-documented phenomenon. Moreover, some of the infrastructure has been damaged and lead to other geomorphological effects. For example, the structures start to collapse or be breached, and there's erosion due to water freezing. There's a whole lot of effects that come into play.
Okay. Maybe just picking up on that, I'm wondering, it seems like there's a bit of a debate around the relative merits of hard gray infrastructure, like what was built in the 60s and 70s, sort of the old Army Corps of Engineers style of armoring the banks of rivers, and this newer way of thinking around natural infrastructure and how to use ecosystems. Could you talk about the relative merits? Maybe you could start on that topic and then we can pick it up next round, given that we only have 10 more seconds.
Jean-François?
Knowledge than me on this one.
Oui, en effet.
Yes. The negative effects of these hard structures, it increases the speed of the current and isn't as effective as vegetation structures. So natural structures provide better diversity in ecosystems, are better for the fish, and there's a lot of benefits to these green structures. A lot of impermeable structures, such as break walls, they cause a transfer of energy, and they have unintended consequences, as you pointed out, environmentally speaking. Sometimes different structures were built in different eras, and that leads to even greater effects.
Next, we have Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
I'd like to thank the witnesses for their evidence today. My first question is for the two mayors, Mayor Allard and Mayor Bart. I am curious to find out what is the composition of the shoreline ownership in respect to private versus commercial versus government ownership of the shorelines that we're talking about within your vicinity.
In the town of Contrecoeur, we have 22 kilometres of shoreline, and part of it is industrial, perhaps in total about 8 kilometres is industrialized. Then there's a residential stretch with higher density of about 8 kilometres too. And then there is an area of about 6 kilometres, which is ecotourism and farming lands. And in Contrecoeur, some of the shoreline is higher than in other areas. And we have the archipelagos of Contrecoeur and a natural federal reserve. There's kayaking, and there's been a number of photographs taken of the ecosystem, and there is a retreating and receding over the years with increasing water levels, freezing and thawing, and when the infrastructure isn't able to contain the water, and there are breaches. There's also the shipping and pleasure craft. There are 2 marinas, and sometimes we also have shoreline along some of the islands of the archipelago that are being affected. I think far too often residents have cleared their land like one does with a golf course. So there needs to be more trees planted to avoid mudslides. There needs to be very strict regulations so that there isn't clear-cutting to build golf courses. And I think there should be subsidies for the replanting of trees.
I'd like to ask you something about the private ownership and the logical justification that you would present for why the government should pay to restore the shoreline for private owners.
Well, you're talking about residents along the shoreline. Well, I think the program stopped in 1997, and those people bought land, and that was in a time when climate change wasn't talked about much, and yet it affected the biodiversity and killed some ecosystems. We've seen climate change, which has also affected the density of trees. And I think those residents need technical expertise so that they can help to, through biodiversity and planting trees, to protect erosion of their shorelines. And with civil engineers, they should look at other alternatives along with grey and hardened infrastructure. But there needs to be a focus primarily on green infrastructure. Those folks that bought their land a long time back don't have the financial means to protect their lands, and it then becomes difficult for them to even sell their land. Obviously, people want to retire at some point. Some people, and of course, one wants to be able to live in a place sheltered from the effects of climate change. And I think Canadians should be entitled to financial assistance so they can put that long-term protection in place for their safety and for the safety and security of their land. And I think we need to think more in the long term. And perhaps the government should buy back those shorelines from those residents to ensure greater sustainability of the shoreline and to protect it from hotter and hotter climates, because the entire ecosystem of the St. Lawrence will be in peril. The Contrecoeur archipelago really needs a program of subsidies for the planting of trees.
May I ask how many homes are in imminent danger of, perhaps collapsing into the waterways?
Well, if I may, so in Contrecoeur, according to the studies, it's actually more serious in Vachères because our shorelines are higher and we have higher cliffs. But if there is no archipelago of islands, there's less protection of the shorelines. And there are a lot of pleasure craft in our area close to the shoreline. So I'd call on the federal government to implement regulations on the speed limits for pleasure craft and the distance that they are from the shoreline. I'm sorry to cut you off. You have no time left.
Badaway, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Chairman, I appreciate that. I'm going to go back to the Great Lakes Cities Initiative because I do, as a part of my former life, was a part of that group of people for 14 years. And I know the great work they do within their communities, especially listening to the folks that we have on today's call within those communities. So again, 2 questions, and I'm going to let you then go as you did last time. First is, do you agree that the Canada Water Agency can in fact be the lead, I guess the one stop for what I call the triple bottom line, and that being the recognition of economic, environmental, and social investments attached to the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence based on the recommendations contained within, for example, the Action Plan 2020-30. 2030. But, and within, and again, I want to get a bit more granular. Within those recommendations, contained within the action plan, there is, on page 10, 2.1 to be exact, building climate change resiliency in shoreline communities. If you go on into the report, I'm just looking at it here, on page 10, for example, or I'm sorry, page 28, or page 28, for example, it speaks about information regarding the economic benefits in dealing with these very problems. And if you go on to page 30 and 31, it talks about the costs of doing the work, but more importantly, the costs of doing nothing. So with that, and I want to remind you that your testimony is needed to be included within this report. So I'm doing this deliberately to get a lot of the recommendations that are contained within that 2020-2030 action plan on the record, so that therefore this committee can actually recommend, based on your testimony, a lot of the recommendations that are contained within that report. So with that, I'll pass on the question to Mr. Murphy Riom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the member for Niagara Centre again for the question. I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank the member for Vimy earlier. I forgot to thank her for participating in our mid-year meeting. I believe it was in January when she had just taken on the portfolio of Parliamentary Secretary for Transport. And so we appreciated her participation at that meeting and entertaining our board members' questions. With respect to the Canada Water Agency, absolutely. An agency that looks at freshwater questions and interior water questions from a triple bottom line approach will ensure its success in getting buy-in from not only the environmental community, but also from the business community, as well as building what I would say as multi-partisan endorsement or support for such an agency. Understanding that there's also a national adaptation strategy that's under development by the federal government. There's certainly an important role for the Canada Water Agency to play with respect to climate adaptation, especially when we look at shoreline resilience, and we would hope to see that as part of the mandate. Given the importance of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River, not only to our economy, if it were to be considered its own country, it would be the 3rd largest economy in the world, with around $7 trillion in economic activity every year. It's also the source of 20% of the world's surface freshwater, a source of drinking water for 40 million Canadians and Americans. It's also a shared resource between with our neighbors to the south, and so that's why we're proud to be a binational organization. And so absolutely having that approach will ensure that we're making the right investments that will yield environmental benefits, but also socioeconomic benefits. And we're seeing that with the U.S. With their Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, or the GLRI program that we would like to see adopted and adapted up here in Canada, with also a significant level of investment. That approximately for every dollar invested in the GLRI, we're seeing a $3 payback for those coastal communities that are seeing those GLRI investments. And so we're seeing that sound environmental investments that are targeted towards the right actions whether that's remediating our waterways or remediating our shorelines, which do have a water quality impact, which have a quality of life impact, which have an impact on municipal infrastructure, will yield very large economic results. So I hope that answers the question, but feel free to.
And just if I can reinforce, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you had mentioned your support for the GLRI. That's comparable to what they're doing in the States. And do you find, as the last question, do you find that as part of that, or the impetus, or the a big part of that GLRI would in fact be the Great Lakes Action Plan 2020-2030, in particular the recommendations contained therein?
Absolutely. Well, the recommendations in the action plan are science-based. They're community-based. We had a series of consultations that were done in the development of this action plan. It was an 18-month process. So this is coming from a series of experts that helped lead consultations with communities, with First Nations communities, with partners, both from an environmental and economic space. And so I think the government has a perfect template for creating a GLRI-like program up here in Canada based on those recommendations in the action plan.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I too, like Mr. Bachrach, am familiar with. We have erosion issues, etc., but mine are on the Fraser River, not the St. Lawrence or the Great Lakes. But I did want to ask, perhaps Mr. Murphy-Réaume or the Université Laval witnesses, if they're aware of how many kilometers, I'll just call it under protected shoreline, are we talking about here? Obviously. The different municipalities know. We heard some testimony about certain sections of the waterways that in their communities that are impacted. But do we have an idea of the total number of kilometers that are impacted by erosion that is impacted by shipping in these the waterways we're talking about today? Mr. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll defer the question to University of Laval. We don't have studies pertaining particularly to the transport industry or its impact on erosion. But as I mentioned earlier, we did do a survey with Ontario and Quebec communities that identified over $300 million worth of investments over the next 5 years to address those issues. And that was only for around 52 communities covering over 9,000 kilometers of shoreline in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Basin. So I'll defer to the members of University of Laval more specifically to your question.
That 9,000 kilometers or so? No, or okay.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, Jean-François, do you have the numbers with you?
J'ai pas le.
I don't have exact figures. It would be easy to get them based on the data that we have up on a site in Quebec about our last study. But just like that, I think that we in the section at issue, 300 kilometers, are showing erosion due to the navigation, but I have no specific data.
On those 300 kilometers, and Mr. Murphy-Réaume had a figure of $300 million. But for let's stick with the 300 kilometers that we're talking about. What is the estimated cost to government, or what would the cost be to fully protect those areas or restore those areas to a satisfactory level to prevent this type of erosion from occurring in the future? Do we have a ballpark figure of, in the ideal world where cost is not a concern, how much is it costing to address this issue?
Si je peux répondre, on parlait tout à l'heure.
If I may, earlier We were mentioning $5,000 to $6,000 per meter. I'm not sure of a total amount, but it's like going to be really high. I think that's what the evaluation would show. We also need to consider how to manage the erosion. We have seen that reducing the speed of vessels has reduced erosion by 50%. So if we could study that, it might be possible to reduce speed even further, such that some sites would no longer be exposed to wake erosion. In the long term, the effects might be minimum in such areas, so that would be another good strategy, not simply building more works, structures that would be quite expensive, as it's easy to see.
Final question would be to the mayor, to either of the mayors. Have you been able to access any of the disaster mitigation and adaptation funds that the Government of Canada has set aside? It's generally for to reduce the risk of flooding, but I'm wondering if any of those, if you've accessed any of those funds and if they have had an impact on erosion almost as a byproduct of protecting your communities from flooding. Mayor Allaire.
At Contrecoeur, we have not received any funding to counter the effects of shoreline erosion. Thank you very much, Mayor Allaire. And now we will hear from Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today and enlightening this committee and the members on some of the challenges that you face in the region you live in regards to shoreline erosion. Not something that I'm certainly familiar with. In Newfoundland and Labrador, we're surrounded by water, but it's a very rocky coastline. And so when we have shoreline erosion, it's primarily from storms and climate change issues that we're talking about. So for the University of Laval reps here today, a couple of questions. First of all, you mentioned a couple of projects, and you've been documenting since 2007 and so on about the natural effects on the coastline or the shorelines in the Great Lakes. I just wonder if you could elaborate on how you think climate change is probably being a major part of that erosion, and whether or not you've documented through videos or pictures of any kind some of the shoreline damages that have been caused.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Chair. What we have documented in the St. Lawrence Seaway, contrary to what other research teams have documented in the estuary and the St. Lawrence Gulf, and this is what's different about the St. Lawrence Seaway section, is that the processes are not the same, the causes are not the same. In the Seaway, climate change is evident in variations in water level, low levels, higher levels. That's really climate change that has a considerable effect on that.
So we know, of course, shorelines are different, and from what I heard today, different sections of the shorelines are different in the Great Lakes. Which ones are especially affected by the operations of commercial vessels, and how so?
En fait, là, il faut revenir très...
All right, we need to go way back in time. Why is erosion as bad as it is in the Seaway sector? It's a clay shoreline which reacts really easily to the wakes. It's humid, it dries out, and then it gets humid again, and it's called the breakdown of the clay. So pretty much all the shorelines in the navigation sector are that type of shoreline, clay shorelines. Sometimes the way the shores are used makes a difference. Sometimes they've been filled in, and that makes them more vulnerable as well. That's another type of shoreline. So that's really the type of shore that we see in the navigation lane, where the wake is having an effect between Lac Saint-Pierre and Montreal.
Some of the witnesses today made reference to some of the green alternatives, and I'm not sure which one, but one of the witnesses said some of the shoreline in front of people's properties are like golf courses. I guess they've cut all the trees and planted grass, excuse me, grass of some kind, and turned to a very green area, which obviously impacts, the protection from the natural elements that you get. So, in addition to changing, I guess, the speed limits they talked about, what are some of the other ways we can prevent shoreline erosion? Is it, planting more trees and doing more things that makes the landscape more resilient to this kind of coastal erosion?
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, one of the means would be to let nature do its work. Vegetation, for example, as Mr. Bernier was saying earlier, that could help reduce the effect of the waves on some shores and allow for sediment, sand, and mud along the edge of the shores that would reduce the friction. Natural revegetation, reforestation as well, trees, that would be helpful.
Done? Okay. So building man-made water breaks would not necessarily be a good solution, as some of you have referenced. So I'm assuming then the green option would be much preferred by the residents that live along the coastline.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, je dois dire.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I must say that we are not specialists, we're not engineers, and we're not infrastructure experts. We can observe the effects of climate change and the human activities on the infrastructure and on the shorelines, but we can't choose the best solution. Once again, though, we would have to give the sediment time to settle in along the shoreline to ensure there would be some continuity between the ocean all the way up to the land, some continuity of the land base, the clays, the sediments, and so on that would settle in on their own. I think that's a pretty important element, and that can be helped along in different ways. Thank you very much, Mr. Lajeunesse.
For your line of questioning. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou.
And now we turn to Mr. Barcelou-Duval. You have 2.5 minutes, and the floor is yours, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, I'm going to speak to Mr. Lajeunesse and Mr. Bernier. The St. Lawrence and Great Lakes area is the most densely populated area of the east of the country, and in fact of the country as a whole. So clearly a number of shorelines have been built up over the years, have been denaturalized, and there's quite an effect of the human presence along the shores. So that means there is less vegetation, less biodiversity, less trees, and all that sort of thing. You also mentioned that the shoreline erosion seems to be more considerable in areas where there have been no protection works built, or actually where it's very natural as well. So how can we work both these types of areas? It would be preferable to leave everything natural, you're saying, and yet people are speaking of some sort of works that should be built. And what would happen if we didn't do anything?
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, To begin with, to answer Mr. Berthelot-Duval, you need to look at the current state of the works that are there. The infrastructure is outdated, it's old, and perhaps that already can help us think this through. Of course, they could be improved on. They could contribute to the resiliency of shores. They do help to some extent, but a natural break would help ensure a natural transition between the land and the sea, you see, which is a long-term solution. There's no perfect solution overall. Perhaps to conclude, Ms. Allaire, I would like to hear from you. You presented a resolution to the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative about this issue. Perhaps you could tell us about what motivated you to do so. Of course, for years now, I've been meeting with Ms. Lagarde and many of my citizens, and I've been helping them discuss this for years and helping them meet government officials at various levels of government. Climate change is a real issue. It's the biggest issue we're facing, and many studies are undertaken by many scientists about the states of our shorelines in our area of the world. This is a long-term issue. We need to do more for people living on the shorelines, for communities along the shorelines, for the islands in the St. Lawrence Gulf. We have to think of reforestation because climate change will continue to affect the situation. Many types of trees are going to die out as the climate warms. Many of these islands will be left bare. There are fish, birds, much sea life in these areas, so we really should do everything we can to help these ecosystems survive. Thank you, Mayor Allaire. We have Mr. Bacharach.
Minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We heard earlier in this meeting about the voluntary speed reduction that was, I won't say imposed, but suggested by the federal government. And I'm wondering if any of the witnesses have a sense of whether there has been substantial compliance monitoring, so seeing whether the shipping companies are obeying or following the voluntary speed reductions, and then effectiveness monitoring, and that is whether the reduction in speed limit is having any impact on reducing the amount of shoreline erosion that's being seen. Mr. Gregoire, you mentioned, I think you most recently referenced the speed limit reduction, so perhaps we can start with you, and I'm not sure if any other witnesses want to jump in with their thoughts. That would be appreciated.
Yes, the speed limit mostly is respected, but in some cases it's been observed that at certain times or at night times, some of the ships are going faster than what they should be. So, but you know, there's a lot of traffic, so it's hard to. It's been observed by the certain sites where you can see the ships, the speed they're going. So I know that recently there's been at least 2 ships about maybe a week or 2 ago that have been going quite faster than what they should have been. So is it all because we can't stay up all night and watch that? But it's hard to say how many ships are not respecting these speed limits. But it has an impact.
Sounds sort of like anecdotal evidence that some ships aren't respecting the speed limits. Is anyone aware of any sort of systematic quantitative approach to compliance monitoring? I guess if it's voluntary, there's no follow it. But
the corporate pilots that the pilots that pilot or that steer the ships have conducted an analysis in the past, and they came to the conclusion that 98% of ships, I think it was 98%, about at least above 95% of these ships did comply with the voluntary reduced speed limit. Now, what I can tell you is that in my area, the reduced speed limit does help to reduce the level of receding shorelines, but it doesn't help. It doesn't. So perhaps instead of being 2 meters per year, it might be 1 per year in some stretches of the shoreline along the river. So it is helpful. It's a laudable measure, but it's not the only way of protecting the shorelines.
Madame Durocher.
Thank you very much, Ms. Durocher. Mr. Badwell.
The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess a question to both Mr. Murphy-Rieume, and I'm going to come over to Mayor Allaire too, with respect to their work on the Great Lakes Cities Initiative. I guess the first question I have is that the U.S. has invested, and for those that don't know, the U.S. or the Great Lakes Cities Initiative is a binational organization that has involvement from the federal, the provincial, and primarily the municipal levels of government to work on Great Lakes and St. Lawrence issues. So with that said, the U.S. has embarked on an extremely aggressive Great Lakes agenda, primarily with the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So I guess the first question to Mr. Murphy-Rieume is, can you elaborate with your experience and work with your U.S. partners, can you elaborate on established partnerships, number one? And secondly, the achievements and benefits to date on this initiative that the U.S. has embarked on so aggressively, including, of course, what we're discussing today, shoreline preservation.
Sure. Well, in terms of partnerships, part of how the GLRI came into formation was through a coalition of concerned organizations in the Great Lakes on the U.S. side who came together and put pressure on the federal government to bring funding along that would help address a multitude of issues, whether it's addressing water pollution, or the attenuation of impacts from climate change on our waterways and the shoreline. The GLRI came out as a bipartisan effort. It has bipartisan support across the Great Lakes region. In fact, when the previous U.S. president threatened to pull GLRI funding, both the community at large, but also the members of both parties pushed back and ensured that funding was not only maintained, but also enhanced. And then with the recent passage of the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act in the U.S., we're seeing even a larger top-up of the GLRI funding on the U.S. side. So we do have some catching up to do, I would say, on the Canadian side, now that our federal neighbors are investing so heavily into the Great Lakes. They may have different priorities, but that being said, whether it's through the GLRI or other programming through that Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, we're seeing a lot of funding that is going towards shoreline resilience in the Great Lakes. In fact, through a partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the eight Great Lakes states and funding through U.S. Congress, they are going to be undertaking a large Great Lakes resiliency study that will determine what the different hazards are across the region, what types of solutions could be implemented, and work towards that implementation. So it's certainly a model that we would like to see here, and it's something I think that we saw reflected in the Action Plan 2020-2030 as well, is this talk of a regional approach. And I think some of those themes have come up on multiple occasions tonight through different members' questioning, is this need for to look at this issue collectively, to work across entire regions and littoral cells, because one community or one individual landowner taking a measure to attenuate the impacts of whether it's climate change or of wave activity from passing ships or pleasure boats or pleasure craft, whatever measures they may take at the individual level may have impacts downstream or on their neighbors. And so we need to come together collectively to address those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy-Riom. Over to Mayor Allaire. I would like to hear your comments on the same question. Madam Mayor?
Well, listen, as far as programs are concerned, that's difficult to define. We'd always like to do more for our residents and become aware of their issues. And sometimes the federal government needs to knock on their door and tell them that there are programs that they can avail themselves of. And federal fauna reserves. Is the federal government taking care of them? Are they monitoring them? Are they doing their job as good stewards? Are they funding them adequately so that these ecosystems are sustainable for the future generations? I have a lot of doubts about that and misgivings. I'm open to work hand in hand with both the federal and provincial governments, but we need subsidy programs, and I'm going to call on your support, as I have previously today, your support for the cities, towns, municipalities that need to spend more and more on water infrastructure in order to safeguard their infrastructures and in order to remediate these shorelines that are going to be crucial for the future generations of human beings and animals. I call on all of you that we need to take a collaborative approach to do something here and not just focus on research, but walk the talk. We know what the statistics are. We are exhausted from talking about statistics. We need to take action on the ground. There's going to be the Contrecoeur terminal that will be built soon, and it's part of the Montreal Port Authority. And there have been a number of success stories over recent years thanks to the investments that the Montreal Port Authority has made in terms of retaining walls. Thank you very much, Mayor Allaire.
Je veux remercier nos témoins.
I'd like to thank our witnesses for their time this evening or this afternoon and for having shared their expertise and feedback and input with our committee.
We're going to suspend, but before I do that, I believe the clerk has had discussions with all of you about the need to approve the budget for the next two meetings, for the next two studies, excuse me. Do I see any objection to that?
I just have one question.
Yes, Mr. Straw.
The funds that are allocated for witnesses, is that just a placeholder? Those are placeholder amounts. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Any objections, colleagues? Seeing none, the budgets for the next two studies are approved. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Merci beaucoup.